Final Fantasy 15 isn't a good game. The story is bare bones, the combat is so dull it's not even funny, and the open world is one of the worst open worlds I have ever had the displeasure of exploring. However, mixed into this are glimmers of hope as to what this game could have been, but ultimately, it's so messy that you never fully appreciate the adventure. If you don't know, Final Fantasy 15 was a strange game when it launched. If you want to fully experience the story, and wait for this, you had to play a side-scrolling game called King's Tale, go through a canonical demo where you play as a young Noctis, watch a CGI film called Kingsglaive, read a short story, watch an anime, and then later down the line you had to play a load of DLC packs, some of which were cancelled, so the game technically still isn't finished. Now I played 15 hours of this game when it released, and I did most of the side content that I could have done, and then I gave up. So this time I went at it with a different approach. I decided I will focus mainly on the story, just to experience Noctis, Gladiolus, Ignis and Prompto's adventure, and also play the DLC to flesh out the story. So how did that go? Well, let's talk about it. The game starts fast, which I appreciate. It's literally like 20 minutes until you can fully control Noctis, and it highlights the adventure aspect of the game. You take control of Noctis and you're listening to the four bicker while pushing a car, and this encapsulated the best parts of Final Fantasy 15. The relationship between the four pals. Noctis is on his way to get married to Lady Lunafreya, a character we know absolutely nothing about, and honestly throughout the story we learn very little about her. So while I appreciate how quickly the game started, it was apparent after not too long that the game needed a proper setup. As the story progressed, I just became more and more confused, and proper nouns were lumped at me, characters were introduced with no warning, and the narrative moments that didn't involve a bromance fell flat. Bromances always get to me, like always. Winnie the Pooh and Christopher Robin, Ratchet and Clank, the whole plot of Onward. There are just so many bromances I could list, and each and every single time they get me right in the feels. I love a good bromance, and it's the best, or should I say, the only good part of Final Fantasy 15. Seeing the four lads' relationship develop throughout the 20 hours of the adventure, and a little back and forth as you explore, made some of the journey worthwhile. There was something authentic about how these lads interacted with each other, constantly making fun of one another, and it was the best part of it, and it made the completely boring gameplay and exploration sections somewhat bearable, but the gameplay issues eventually wore down. Now later on we'll fully get into spoilers, but right now I need to break down the gameplay and tell you exactly what's wrong with it, and there's a lot wrong with it. So firstly, the world is too big with not enough in it to justify its size. The Regalia is a cool vehicle, and you're going to spend a lot of time in it. Driving it is awful. It's kind of on rails, and it's handled terribly. It would stick to the track on the road, you can't drive off the road, and anytime you have to turn, it feels like you're battling with the car, and I simply hated driving. Most of the time I use autopilot or just fast travel, because while listening to the party chatter was entertaining, the distances you have to travel are stupid, and it artificially extended the length of the game. Now at some point you unlock chocobos, and they are the coolest mounts ever in games, full stop, and their team plays as you ride them. It's super cool, but the world is massive, so it takes away from them because they're not as fast as a Regalia or fast travel. Other than exploring the world, of course, you have to engage in combat. And that means that you have to hold circle or press square, and that's it. This is one of the most bland combat systems ever. So as I said, you hold circle to attack, you hold square to dodge, and then you can do other things like warp strike to enemies and point warp to get out of harm's way and regain health. And yes, that's all you do while fighting. Holding circle and dodge with square. You can change your weapons on the fly and the combat looks cool, but Jesus Christ is it mind-numbing. I also think this game has one of the worst magic systems in the series. You can craft spells by using element deposits littered around the world, and you can make cool spells like multicast and then imbue them with items so they have different effects, like also healing you while you cast them. But these are all consumable spells, so if you really want to engage with it, you have to keep finding elemental deposits, harvest them, and keep crafting. And I'm sure there's something hidden away in the skill tree which will improve this, but I just never felt the need to do it. After like 8 hours, I turned the game down to easy just so I could experience the story and breeze through the combat. And while I bring up the skill tree, it's fine. But since the combat is so unengaging, I didn't care about it. And get this, it turns out there's a skill to be able to control your party members, which I didn't realise until very late in the game, and I much prefer controlling these over Noctis, especially Gladio. He feels a bit more deliberate and less floaty, which helped a lot, but it was a little too late in my eyes. Now the side quests are just dull, they're simple fetch quests and monster hunts, which I don't think inherently is a bad thing, but the combat system needs to be fun for me to want to do these quests, and as you can see, It just isn't. And one more annoyance before I go into full story spoilers. Most buttons have multiple inputs which are context sensitive, and this just makes the game feel so clunky. You press X to jump, but also to pick up items and interact with things. So pretty much every time you want to interact with something, you have to do this little dance. And then you dodge or block with square, but also crouch behind cover, which caused plenty of issues during combat. Honestly, I had an awful time, and adding these sort of minor annoyances across a whole journey just makes the game feel awful to play. Now, full story spoilers ahead, but I don't recommend you play this game. The story falls apart as you go along. And where I noticed this was Lady Lunafreya. You get a handful of cutscenes about her and Noctis when they were young, but it's probably like 15 minutes of cutscenes across like 15-ish hours. And then she dies, and somehow I'm supposed to care about her. I felt more about Iris, who very clearly fancies Noctis, because we actually get to spend time with her rather than being told. The game basically just told me that I had to care about Lady Lunafreya without actually earning it, and it was like it was just trying to force me to feel something for her, but I just didn't care. At the start, you get like 2 minutes with Noctis' dad before he dies, and their relationship seems to be quite cold. But then later in the game, Noctis seems to care deeply for him, which is just confusing. It makes no sense. All the proper nouns are thrown at me about the history of Noctis' family and the powers they have, and once again, I'm just confused. Now, I'm sure someone will say, well, if you engage with the notes around the world, you watch the anime, you listen to the audiobook, you play the mobile iOS game, then, you'll fully understand it, but that simply isn't good enough. I'm here to play the game, and at the end of the game, the story should at least feel satisfying, or at least set up for a sequel if it doesn't feel satisfying. Now, having confusing plots isn't too big an issue if the characters are good. I'll forever be confused on the overarching plot of Final Fantasy VII, but I care about the characters in that game, so I don't mind. And of course, Final Fantasy VII Remake is actually a fun game to play, not like Final Fantasy 15. And about the DLC, I've heard that it fleshed out certain parts of the narrative. And I played episode Gladio around chapter 7, which is when Reddit told me to play it, and it was fine. There was a slight bit more backstory, but nothing groundbreaking. It did introduce me to playing as Gladio, which I really enjoyed, and I had all intentions of beating the other DLC packs when I finished the game, but I couldn't. I just didn't like this game whatsoever. Every single play session felt dull, and when I rolled credits, I had enough. Final Fantasy 15 is death by 1,000 cuts. The combat system is simple, looks cool, but it's boring. The open world is too big with very little to do in it bar fetch quests and drive around like a headless chicken. The plot is incomplete, and many of the hard-hitting moments left no impact. And then at the end, when I had to do some grinding just to be high enough level to beat the final boss, I just zoned out. I disliked every play session after the first 5 hours, and I'm disappointed that I wasted nearly 20 hours trying to beat this game. So whatever you do, don't try to play this game before Final Fantasy 16 if you are curious. Now, I have beat the demo of Final Fantasy 16, and that game has more story in its left toe than Final Fantasy 15 does in its whole body, and I can't wait to play that game. So I really appreciate you watching. What are your thoughts on Final Fantasy 15? Because as you can see, I really disliked it. Join the Discord down below, subscribe, like the video, all that crap. I'll see you all on the next video. Goodbye.